Shalini is an assistant professor in the School of Public and International Affairs. Her research focuses on understanding the collaborative and intellectual processes and outcomes of large-scale team science research and training initiatives funded by the NIH, NAS, or NASM, and the National Science Foundation. Her research has led to the development of theory, evaluation frameworks, measures, and metrics to assess the intellectual and integrative quality and societal impacts of inter and transdisciplinary and convergent research and training programs. And so we are happy to have you, and we look forward to your remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I will get right to it because I'm told I have to keep it under 20 minutes over here. So I'm going to talk about cross-disciplinary team science and specifically focus on how the science of team science can contribute to our understanding of disease transmission, and specifically the integration of the human, engineering, scientific, and humanistic dimensions of disease transmission. So first, before I go ahead and get started, I want to introduce you to some large-scale trends that are happening in the process of knowledge creation. So first of all, the process of knowledge creation has changed and transformed fundamentally. Teams now dominate the production of knowledge in all fields universally. Teams also produce more highly cited research than individuals do. They also produce exceptionally high impact research. And since the 1970s and mid-1980s, at least in the US, the research landscape has changed from purely curiosity-driven basic research to use-inspired research or applied research because of the challenge, environmental problems and challenges. So cross-disciplinary researchers are increasingly citing work outside of their own disciplines. This research is more impactful over time, even though this research has been found to be less impactful in the first 3 years. But if you calculate it over the next 13 years, cross-disciplinary teams produce more impactful research. And subjectively, this research also has been rated by peers as having significant societal impact as compared to research that is produced by unidisciplinary teams and individual solo researchers. So what is driving these trends? There's an interest in large, ambitious, complex scientific initiatives. Researchers also need to address the multifactorial societal challenges that have enormous complexity. Advances in computational and technological capacities have fueled this kind of cross-disciplinary, large-scale team science research. There's, of course, increased public and private investment for cross-disciplinary research across the world, from Horizon Europe in Europe to the Chinese Academy of Sciences through its Beijing Declaration, to the German Academy of Sciences, to similar initiatives in Australia and Brazil, and right here from the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. Universities usually are slower in coming on board, but there have been a proliferation of collaborative, team-based, problem-focused units such as institutes and centers at universities, and increasingly, although slowly, hiring and promotion and tenure policies have begun to recognize, I won't say promote or facilitate or appreciate cross-disciplinary research, but they have started to recognize cross-disciplinary team science. Perhaps more needs to be done to value it. And we will talk about these barriers later in the presentation. However, there are debates about the scientific and societal value of cross-disciplinary research. So more recent research has found that overall, over the past 6 decades, 20 million papers, an equal number of patents, we find that research is becoming less disruptive over time and universally across fields. And what do we mean by less disruptive? It means that science and technology is less likely to break paths from current paradigms and really shift in different and new directions, creating new ways of thinking of things. And this is largely because researchers are relying on literature and research that is closely related to their own field. So they're doing really narrow multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary work, really, citing research, drawing on research that is closely related to their own discipline, and not really looking at broad and distant disciplines that are more distantly related to the topics that they are working on. So there's a need for engagement with distant fields and cultivating a breadth of knowledge. At the same time, there is a lot of pressure to call your own work interdisciplinary, and yet, there is a strong resistance to interdisciplinary work in academia. So at the same time, very prominent scholars have questioned the societal value and intellectual benefit and merit of cross-disciplinary work over unidisciplinary, small, kind of small team-based solo work, for legitimate reasons, that it takes away resource from basic research. That is also very important for our society. Researchers pay a productivity cost. We have evidence about this as well, that researchers who engage in cross-disciplinary work produce less papers actually in the beginning of their careers, but it is propelled over time, so it requires actually more time because of the transaction costs of working in these large teams. This research takes a lot of time to set up, right? And it's a complex research process, so it's very difficult to do this. It is not sufficiently recognized in academia, in our promotion and tenure policies, and we do not have sufficient expertise to actually evaluate this kind of research. So here is where the science of team science is really born, right? Because of the need for evaluating the effectiveness, this intellectual benefit and the societal value of research, this field called the science of team science came into being, right, in the early 2000s. So team science is what scientists collaboratively and often cross-disciplinary researchers do as they approach and analyze research questions. And the science of team science, the field that I practice, that I am a part of, is a branch of science studies, sociology really, that is concerned with understanding and managing the circumstances that facilitate or hinder the effectiveness of scientific initiatives. So what are some of the key questions addressed in the science of team science research? First, we're interested in what intrapersonal or individual, interpersonal, organizational, and institutional factors influence the effectiveness of cross-disciplinary science initiatives. How do we really assess the effectiveness of cross-disciplinary team science beyond bibliometric analysis and citation analysis? Some of the research that I cited in the beginning of the presentation really drew on this kind of bibliometric and citation analysis. How can institutional, organizational, and team leaders design and manage successful cross-disciplinary team science initiatives? What do we even mean by effectiveness and success in team science initiatives? What dispositions and competencies and skills are needed for effective cross-disciplinary team science? And how might we train students as well as early career and seasoned scientists to be effective team researchers, team scientists? So not all team science initiatives are the same. One of the problems in this field is that we do not have generic, generalizable criteria for effectiveness of team science because of the divergence in team science, in the kinds of team science projects. So, this is a framework from Dan Stokols that categorizes the organizational, geographic, and analytical scope of cross-disciplinary research. For example, you could have a team of researchers within a university working on a particular project. They could come from different disciplines, and that would be intra-organizational, less complex, compared to a large team of researchers collaborating with industry, nonprofit organizations, community members, which is intersectoral in its scope. You could be co-located, right, within the same geographical milieu, or you could have collaborators across the globe. And very importantly, you could be bridging the biological with the psychological and the socio-environmental and community policy levels, bridging multiple levels of analysis. as opposed to, working closely within, a single level of analysis. So as you can imagine, the more levels of analysis bridged, the more complex the research is, the wider the geographical scope is, the more complex that research is, and the more intersectoral or interorganizational the research is, the complexity dimensions of team science increase. The National Research Council developed this kind of table or a typology of complexity dimensions of team science. So, the dimensions of team science, when we try to evaluate, well, how do we actually evaluate this team? Because, is it homogeneous or more heterogeneous in terms of its sociodemographic, gender, disciplinary and intellectual diversity? What's the size of the team? Small, 2 to 3 members, to mega. There's a science of big team science as well, 1,000 or more members. How aligned are the goals? How shared are people's interests? And especially when you're working with industry members or with members of the community, your goals are not actually very, very aligned. So that increases the complexity of the teams. Your organizational, usually we think of teams, your membership is stable, but there are many teams in which the membership, keeps changing. So if you have a project which is 5, 7, or 10 years, you'll have PhD students, master students, postdocs coming in, going out. So the team changes, the composition of the team changes, that changes the dynamics of the team and the intellectual processes and outcomes of the team. Task interdependence, how sequential or coordinated or interdependent the various research activities are within the team. That's one of the complexity dimensions as well. So why did I call my presentation cross-disciplinary instead of convergence research, right? Why not the word transdisciplinary? Why not the word convergence research? I more and more as I study these teams, I think the word cross-disciplinary is more inclusive and accurate in terms of the kind of research that is actually practiced and implemented in these kinds of large-scale initiatives. Cross-disciplinary research is an all-encompassing term that includes a variety of knowledge integration activities, some that are more sequential and less coordinated, to the most integrative kind of work. And it can span academics to industry partners, to community members, to cross-sectoral kind of partnerships with organizations. So think of cross-disciplinarity as an overarching term that includes multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity. So multidisciplinary research is which is most of what most research, kind of spans between multi and interdisciplinary research, in my experience. It's when researchers, kind of work more independently or sequentially on a research project. And they do not change as a result of participating in that research project. They remain rooted to their own disciplinary perspective. So there's not a lot of learning or change that happens. An example would be an edited volume, creating an edited volume on a really cross-disciplinary topic, but different people from different disciplines write different chapters of that particular book, and the editor creates an introduction and a conclusion, and there's not much effort to integrate the different insights or create a new conceptual framework or a new construct. Right. Another example could be, 2 or 3 faculty members co-teaching a class, where different topics are introduced, but the integration work is left to the students, to kind of, it's not deliberate, right? Interdisciplinary work is more integrative. Researchers work jointly, again, but still rooted from their specific basis. So in this, you see this in a lot of proposals where, large research projects are divided into different aspects, different actions, different activities, different sub-research projects. And those research projects are carried out by a set of small disciplinary perspectives, right? An environmental engineer working with their graduate student and a postdoc on a certain part of a research project, right? Which is later perhaps brought in, their data and methods are brought into other parts, to a more comprehensive model, right? But they're still working from a very disciplinary specific perspective and not generating any shared or overarching framework. Transdisciplinary research, on the other hand, creates new theory, creates new conceptual frameworks that are different, that synthesize, first of all, the insights, constructs, from, or theories from particular disciplines, and transcend them, And so they create a new overarching conceptual framework to address a particular problem. And researchers share that mental model, right? They're using the same, they apply that shared research conceptual framework in addressing a particular common problem. So you can see that there's a continuum of integration or disciplinary integration from unidisciplinary research over here, which is not at all integrative. It can be team-based, but not integrative, to transdisciplinary research that really creates novel research, novel conceptual frameworks that synthesizes and transcends individual disciplinary perspectives. And when we evaluate these researchers, we find that there's a lot of learning that has occurred as a result of this, as a result of participating in these teams. These researchers move in different directions as a result of participating in cross-disciplinary research projects. So where does convergence research really come in compared to the research on transdisciplinarity, inter and transdisciplinarity, which has been happening since the past 60 years, right? 60 years or more, since the 1960s and 70s, I would say. Convergence research is a relatively new term that first appeared in Mike Rocco's and Phil Sharp's work in the health sciences, who conceptualized it as the synthesis or integration of the life and physical sciences, the mathematical and computational sciences, and engineering. So as you can see, there is no mention of social sciences or the humanities, or any mention of communities, community members, or professions beyond academia, right? The National Research Council, developed this kind of definition of convergence research that really focuses on the problem-focused aspect of crossing disciplinary boundaries and emphasizes integration. So this is the definition that NSF provides for convergence research. They don't talk about the distinctions between multi, inter, and trans, but they focus on addressing vexing research problems, focusing on societal needs. They emphasize integration across disciplines, and integration can be through theory, methods, data, research communities, and the generation of conceptual frameworks, language, construct, research communities, or even disciplines. So my most recent research project actually was funded by the NSF to actually understand what convergence research is, how it is understood by the people who practice it and those who fund it, and what we can learn from prior research on transdisciplinarity and science of team science to advance convergence research, right? This is the paper that I cite over here. In fact, all of the citations are going to be available in the end if you are interested. So one of the things that we found, is that describing how convergence research is really more than cross-disciplinary research, inter, multi, and trans. It's elusive to RDI funders and scholars. And in fact, after this research, NSF actually put on their website that convergence research is similar to transdisciplinary research, which is the pinnacle of integration. The National Academy of Sciences, in its most recent report on convergence research in fostering a culture of convergence, says that a significant overlap exists between transdisciplinary research, science of team science, or team science, and convergence. So I'm going to use the term transdisciplinary research and convergence research based on this research, on my own research and other people's research. I'm going to use it interchangeably from now on. And I'm going to elucidate what this transdisciplinary or convergence research looks like in practice based on mine and other people's research. First, convergence research projects or transdisciplinary research projects are not reductive, but they grasp the complexity of the problem. They try to be more inclusive. They try to understand the many dimensions of the problem. And the way they do that is to account for a diversity of perspectives. They're not scared of including divergent perspectives, ones that kind of conflict with each other. Disciplines often find knowledge that is conflicting with each other. But convergence research projects try to accommodate those kinds of divergent perspectives and worldviews within their research projects deliberately. They try to really grasp contextual knowledge. They try to build knowledge within a particular setting, within a particular culture, within a particular group of people, within a particular historical and cultural context. So in that way, they try to link contextual knowledge with abstract or theoretical knowledge. And they are always thinking of the common good and the public interest, as they are thinking of developing knowledge and practices, policies, or products. So it's not just the next paper, or the next patent, or the next proposal, or the next grant, but they're thinking of the broader societal needs and common goods, the common good. So when we see that in a proposal or in a particular research project, we say, yes, this project really is taking transdisciplinarity seriously. All right, so what do we mean by effectiveness? How do we gauge whether a team has been effective in producing cross-disciplinary research, right? So we did a big meta-analytical study of 4 disciplines that have actually produced decades or 100 years of research on teams. One is social psychology and industrial and organizational psychology that has really produced a lot of research on teams, though not particularly science teams. Second is community-based action research projects, research in public health and sociology, anthropology that has worked, that has actually engaged with communities to produce research. They have a lot of information on teams. Research on cyber infrastructures, right? Spatially distributed teams and how spatially distributed teams work. And then research on actual team science projects, a living lab of NIH's TREC initiative or TTURC initiative and the Cancer Research Institute. So we evaluated all of these and brought all of these lines of research together to develop a set of criteria for gauging the effectiveness of team science initiatives. So what we found that there are 2 types of criteria. One is, generic criteria, easy to count. Number of publications, quality of publications, the cognitive dimensions of teams, affective dimensions of teams, how sustainable this team is, right? Those are generic, but those are not really as relevant to cross-disciplinary scientific teams. So cross-disciplinary scientific teams, do they have, for example, translational outcomes? Are they able to catalyze collective action on a particular project? Did they result in policy change? Did they develop new theory, new conceptual frameworks? These are some of the criteria. The training of the students, so did civil engineering students and environmental engineering students end up in public policy departments, say, for example? That's a kind of measure of convergence. So I will talk a little bit more about some of the barriers and challenges of gauging effectiveness in team science. So I'm not going to go over this slide, which you can barely read over here. But what came up in this big kind of meta-analytical research is that, there's an ecology of circumstances that is important in actually gauging effectiveness of team science. And I'm going to focus only on the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and organizational dimensions. It cannot be overemphasized how important individual dispositions, your own attitudes, team member and leader preparation, their capacity in conflict resolution, their capacity to anticipate and manage conflict, their capacity to engage community members, to be a transformative leader, to be inclusive. These factors turned out to have an outsized impact on the success of team science. It's not the science, it was the team capacity that was able to do this. So similar with the interpersonal factors, how inclusive were the team members? How willing were they to put in the work, and deal with the complexities that were required in this kind of work, their frustration tolerance, their tolerance for ambiguity and the uncertainties of this kind of research. And finally, the organizational incentives. You cannot get assistant professors to come and participate in team science initiatives if their deans are saying that, no, don't go and do this, waste time in this kind of research because it's not going to produce, first authored or solo authored papers. And it's a really different conceptualization of the quality of scholarship. So promotion and tenure committees, for example, who do not know how to evaluate the quality of team scientific work or publications is a problem. Promotion and tenure committees who don't recognize cross-disciplinary work, or promotion and tenure policies that do not understand the complexities of this research and how time-consuming this kind of research is, are all barriers to kind of effective, successful, and sustainable team science. Similarly, most recently, we conducted a large-scale research on NSF's growing convergence research and convergence accelerator programs. We specifically focused on these two programs, compared it with NIH's and NASA's kind of team science initiatives, and tried to understand, well, what actually influences convergence research? And we came up with results that were very similar to the ecology of team science transdisciplinary research. That really we found out convergence research cannot be effective without the interaction and feedback of these ancillary systems. That's why we call it a system of systems. It's not just research, it's a research ecosystem. So at the individual or researcher level, there are a host of factors that impact the quality of the research produced and the intellectual impact and societal impact of the research produced. This is what we call collaboration systems. Inquiry systems refer to the dynamics of the team dynamics, and contextual systems refer to the socio-physical and organizational and institutional factors. Won't go into the details, but I can share the paper with you. What I will go into detail is talk about one specific aspect, since I'm so focused on the importance of member attitudes and intrapersonal dispositions. I will focus on how we measure whether researchers are ready for collaborative work. So we try to conceptualize something called the transdisciplinary orientation, and we developed a measure for it. And we tracked people's self-reported transdisciplinary orientation, which is just a disposition that you have that can be cultivated through exposure to different settings, working with different people, being trained in different disciplines, that really impacts, that we thought really impacts and predisposes people to doing really good collaborative convergence research. And we wanted to see, well, is this right? Is the transdisciplinary orientation really impacting the quality of scientific products? So there were values, attitudes, beliefs, conceptual skills, behaviors. We measured all of these factors, through a validated scale, and validated that scale. And then we looked at the products that researchers produced. Rather than looking at what people cited and who cited them, like in bibliometric analysis, we actually got experts, independent raters from different disciplines, to gauge the quality of the product. So we developed a scale called the Written Products Protocol, which was based on some of my earlier work with the national academies and evaluating and NIH's roadmap project. And we asked independent raters who did not know anything about the hypothesis of the project, these papers were double-blinded, they did not know who these papers were, but they knew something about the field, right? And the disciplines, that were mentioned or addressed in these fields. So we asked them, to rate the extent of cross-disciplinary integration. And by the way, these raters were trained in what we mean by integration and cross-disciplinary integration. We asked them to find out what the levels of analysis and the scales mentioned were in these papers, which we do not get in bibliometric analysis. We asked them what the contributions to theory, methodology, and practice were. And we talked about the number of disciplines represented in this research. So we had both objective and subjective measures. So what we found was that indeed, transdisciplinary orientation, people who said that they felt that they were more oriented to this kind of research, they also produced more interdisciplinary work as rated by independent raters, other scholars. Right? Participants who reported more experience in participating in cross-disciplinary teams, which means that you can actually cultivate this. This is something for NSF, that fund researchers to actually, even if they don't know how to do it, this experience actually helps them in building the capacity, and especially junior researchers and postdoctoral scholars and PhD students, because over time, these exposure to these settings also impacts the quality of the intellectual and societal impact of this research. And also higher self-reported transdisciplinary orientation was researchers who had this orientation produced research that was rated to be of high societal impact, not only scientific impact, but also societal impact. So, as you can see, integration is central to convergence research, to transdisciplinary research. And we can talk about what you produced in the end, right? The product. But that's not the whole story. There's a process that is happening as you engage within these teams. And that process is equally important. So another part of my research has focused on evaluating how individual researchers communicate and dialogue within these teams. So when we see really convergent research projects, or ones that are really doing well or making an effort in these research projects, we see that these researchers, they start to critically evaluate the knowledge that comes from their own disciplines and challenge that, right? They evaluate their own positional biases rather than saying, the social scientists don't really get this, or, these people don't really know the math behind this, or this is really difficult to integrate, or they just think too differently. What has politics got to do with anything? They critically evaluate their own epistemes, right? First of all, they become aware of their own epistemes. They realize that other people have them too. And they try to critically evaluate, that, my discipline kind of makes these assumptions, and these assumptions need to be challenged, right? They demonstrate what we call double loop learning, a change in their mental models over time. They come with a certain kind of frame of, what the research topic should be and how this research should be addressed. And as they engage more, those mental models shift over time. And they creatively combine insights because of spending a lot of time on reflection and develop results that are valid for a particular context. So, here are some examples from my research that we found in understanding the communication and dialogue in these teams. You see that these researchers try to accommodate epistemological differences. They don't resolve them. They're very difficult to resolve, but they accommodate them. They don't only focus on facts, right? Finding out, what the data can show us and, what we can find, but they focus on the normative, whether it's right or wrong. They focus on the ethical issues. So extremely convergent or transdisciplinary research projects become concerned with the ethical issues of their particular problem. They generate a really more comprehensive understanding of the problem rather than incremental understandings, right? Rather than replicating research, applying it to a different context, adding a little, another kind of data point. They are generating, trying to integrate really different fields and therefore generating new meaning. So what practical recommendations do I have for people who are working in cross-disciplinary teams? As well as funding agencies that are interested in promoting this kind of research? I would say spend a lot of time on team composition. Really consider not only the expertise that you want to bring into this team, into your team. Usually we try to say, well, who's the expert in this in my university or in other universities? How could I get that expert into my particular team? Rather than that, right, in addition to that, really consider whether that person has time, whether that person really is interested in doing cross-disciplinary work, whether they have that transdisciplinary disposition and orientation, whether they have the openness. Maybe give them the transdisciplinary orientation scale as a test, to whether this person would really gel well with you, because people don't come into the team with the same interests. They don't share the same. You might want to publish a paper in science. They might just want to be the seventh author, right, in a paper, right? So or they just want to this is something nice to have on my CV, right? You need to share the same interests. Consider your own transdisciplinary orientation and collaborative readiness. Just because I know that there is a lot of pressure to call yourself interdisciplinary, call your research interdisciplinary, but really think about whether you are prepared for this kind of research, because it is not, as one of my colleagues really said, winging it is not an option in cross-disciplinary, large-scale research. There really needs to be a deliberate process. Consider training, and specific interventions for yourself and for your team members to promote team effectiveness, and consider including someone with science of team science expertise or convergence research expertise. And this is not facilitation. This is not facilitation expertise. Convergence researchers really, they have expertise in the fields that are represented, in the particular team. So they are particularly knowledgeable in the domain areas. In addition to that, they have a facility to kind of understand the integration challenges, point them out to PIs and co-PIs, develop team structures to facilitate the cross-pollination of ideas, work with team members on their communication norms and strategies, and design interventions for promoting team cohesion, team climate, and shared team mental models, so that to facilitate sense making. All right. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. All of the research that is cited in this presentation are available over here. So feel free to go and check them out. And if you are interested in any of the papers that I referred to in the presentation, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take questions, of course.
Great talk. I actually have a question. I mean, in terms of this community doing convergent research, like from NSF perspective, to me, I mean, this is my own opinion, the most successful convergence project was the National Nanotechnology Initiative. So, and why that is the case, because it was a very simple idea. Can you control matter at the nanoscale, 100 nanometer, right? So with that question, you got chemists, you got material scientists, you got biologists, they all came together with their tool, their expertise to bear on that. Then fast forward, it was so successful that the field span off nanomedicine, nanoelectronics. So in this disease transmission emergence, can we think of a question like simple enough to bring all the community to really push this forward? I mean, these are not just for you, but it's for everybody.
Yeah. But you bring up a really important point that I didn't really talk about that or mention in this research. That one of the other things that we have found is that beyond the interpersonal and intrapersonal factors that impact the quality of the work produced and the convergence of the work produced, it's the way the questions are conceptualized. Right. So this nanotechnology work, some researchers would call it interdisciplinary research and not transdisciplinary research, because, but you said, well, if they generated shared conceptual frameworks and disrupted fields and synthesized and integrated things that would not have been generated from their single disciplines, then transdisciplinary research. The kind of research, disease transmission is quite different from nanotechnology research because they're thinking about humans, human behavior, risk. We just came from a panel right now that is that really delved into this the complexity of this kind of research, and the need to integrate disciplines that are very divergent from their own. Some might argue that nanotechnology, integrating various disciplines of engineering may not be that integrative as integrating engineering with anthropology, for example. That is very difficult to do, and that's where the challenge really lies. And we talked about this in this panel, that there's a need to do that, or integrating engineering with perceptions of indigenous communities and understandings of the world that are not scientific or do not adhere to Western conceptualizations of science. Then what do you do? Right? And how do you integrate the subjectivities in this research? So I'd like to challenge the audience to kind of think in those dimensions. Yes.
The question, kind of jumping off of Amadou's question, is when seeing this most successful convergence research, thinking about the question, how they're formulating, and whether how broad or specific they are. And I know I'm working on a interdisciplinary team that we're doing quite well. We have a lot of disciplines. It's great, but it's not in this realm. It's in urban flooding. Mm-hmm. But it's a relatively focused yet broad question, so it allows others to come in. And so what's interesting about disease transmission in the indoor environment, for example, if we're too specific, it's hard to get interdisciplinary. So I'm wondering what your findings are about how broad or specific.
Correct. So we are just doing, I'm on two NSF GCR projects, and one of this project, Peter is on one of those projects with me over here on salinization, on freshwater salinization, and we are evaluating, what happens over time, right? What kind of research do large scale initiatives that are addressing really complex environmental research produce over time? And in fact, there is a place for basic research in convergence research, because one of the things that we found that the goals of the research change over time. When you are dealing with complex problems, you do need basic research to actually understand this problem. So sometimes you do need to focus and kind of scope questions narrowly. However, when you're thinking about action and translational outcomes, it is extremely important. I really appreciate your point to scope those problems out, develop a question in which, a kind of discipline can see themselves, see their contribution, either methodologically or through a theoretical construct. But, but I also think that, it's not as if, you're never doing unidisciplinary research in convergence research projects. Other questions? Yes, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if there is a transdisciplinary orientation self-assessment tool.
Yes.
To better understand
there is
different aspects of how I should improve, or so others can know to avoid working with me for a couple of years while I get.
Yeah, yes, there is. And, it's used widely in NSF actually for the IGOT programs. It's a very well validated, well cited, kind of tool, and you can use it. We have it for undergraduate students. We have it for early career researchers. We have it for seasoned researchers that you can actually use. One of the things that we do find is that there's a lot of social desirability bias in saying that, of course I'm very open, and my past research is very, really demonstrates cross-disciplinarity. But when you actually look at what the researchers have done in their publications, they do not demonstrate cross-disciplinarity. So I would add, it's my own scale, but I would add a grain of salt over there, because there's a lot of pressure to call yourselves transdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary, right? But we still find strong correlations and connections to the quality of the work produced. Yes.
I guess I'm wondering, what can we learn from other fields around disease transmission, specifically maybe more the medical field, where when they're designing new drugs, right, they have a structured, phased approach to clinical trials.
Yes.
Right? It's how can we invest little bits of money earlier, figure out what works on the bench scale and scale those up. And I mean, I have to imagine there's transdisciplinary work that's going into those types of different phases to build things up to then spend more money and investments later. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if this is a great question, but what can we learn from that? Are there other fields that are doing this well, that as we're thinking about how do we evaluate engineering controls or similar things, is there other models of transdisciplinary research that were applied in such a way that make it scalable, that we can think about in our research to give us a greater chance of success with the engineering controls that we're thinking about?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, one of the things that the Swiss National Academies does, in their research proposals, is that they really want researchers in their proposals to think about the integration challenges. They don't only think about the scientific challenge or the gap that you are filling, or where the research, where fields are converging, right? In NSF, for example, in the smart and connected communities, or in NSF Future of Work, you're really asked to talk about the convergence aspects of your project. But one thing that researchers can really do is to think about what are the integration challenges, right, over here. So really requires you to know a lot about the team members' work, really delve into the papers that they have written, and actually what they are going to contribute, their role in this research, and sort out those challenges, right? And if you have, and you can phase out your integration challenges, right, over time, and think of, well, for the salinization question over here, right? Okay, we don't know much about this emerging kind of environmental problem, right? So therefore we need to understand what the sources are. And there's a place for hydrological research over here. There's a place for environmental pure, unidisciplinary work over here. And then making that really clear that, okay, NSF, our growing convergence research projects is tackling a complex problem. And in this complex problem, we really need to understand the origins of this problem, which is unidisciplinary, and the way this problem kind of moves around, and then the perceptions, the subjective aspect of these problems. We're working with stakeholders, so that is social science, and it's unidisciplinary as well. And then we can think that, okay, in the intermediate and the future stages of these projects, we plan to integrate these insights in X, Y, and Z ways, either through these kind of dialogic interventions, or actually visiting, doing kind of a power analysis of these agencies or, kind of visiting, kind of these agencies and seeing how they actually work. So yeah, just to answer your question, I think thinking very seriously about the place of unidisciplinary work and how distant fields are going to be integrated over time is a more realistic kind of approach to the complexity of this research. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, how do we harness the moment that we all saw with COVID, that the whole world had this one single problem and we brought all of our resources together, right? It was a beautiful moment in terms of bringing everything together to develop vaccines, to develop, infrastructures. And sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was a really good example of bringing all of this energy together. So how do we harness that moment? Because my concern is that we're losing that moment right now, and we're kind of starting to, dismantle, but we know what we can be if we all work towards that same societal impact goal. So I don't know if you have any suggestions for us as a community.
Oh man, I think it's beyond my pay grade. I mean, this, how do we capture that moment? Well, if I'm being really honest, and we see this in environmental problems as well, right? Crisis, not interdisciplinary research, not convergence research, but crisis is usually prompts social movements, right? It usually prompts action. We see this in other fields, beyond research as well. So we know that this can be, and then when the crisis is kind of either really or perceptually, subjectively, kind of out of people's mind, out of sight, out of mind, you lost interest in. And one of the reasons that we did not invest much in if I'm correct, in the SARS-CoV pandemic, in actually researching it, is because it was not deemed to be an urgent problem, right? Prior to the pandemic, right? And NIH really took some flack for that, right? Not investing sufficiently for this. I hope we don't make the same mistake. What else, Claudia, can I say that, I hope if history is, we have made the same mistakes. We do make the same mistakes, yeah.
Follow-up question or perspective on that, and it's based on somewhat of a topic that came up in an earlier conversation. So, say we want to achieve global energy efficiency and sustainability, right? We could try to motivate individual behavior, or we can change building codes and standards, right? And in the same way, we talked about the potential for changing the way architecture is fundamentally approached in the built environment to incorporate reductions in disease transmission by design, right? So I'm wondering if there's an analogy here for the way that we structure and incentivize research in a more fundamental way, or who has the opportunity to do this? Does it mean that NSF changes its proposal application requirements, or that NIH changes its requirements for funding opportunities to require transdisciplinary research, right? Or do all postdocs have to have some structured transdisciplinary project as a part of their program or something like that, right? I'm wondering if there are opportunities, instead of leaving it to circumstance or being responsive to excuse me, situations that occur that affect humanity, is there a way to embed this into the structure of and the operation of the research community over time, so that we encourage transdisciplinary research more and more?
Yeah, so important. And yes, there are ways that this should be. I mean, if NSF, NIH, Horizon Europe, Chinese Academy of Sciences, all over the world, if they want this research to be successful, then it is not just the funding, right? And not just the time period for this. For example, invest in researchers, unidisciplinary researchers, with solo investigator grants to ask them to go to distant fields and actually develop their understanding deeply of anthropology. So let's say an environmental engineer really learns about sociology, take a sabbatical, research funding for a sabbatical to understand a particular discipline, kind of deeply, that is related to the kind of questions that they want to generate. So that would improve, individuals' transdisciplinary orientation, right? Rather than only focusing on large scale team science science initiatives, right? And hoping that the magic happens somehow, right? Because people are in the table, focusing a lot on training, right? Building an ecosystem of training. We have to work, funding agencies have the power to work with universities to kind of do some wrist, put some pressure on universities to actually train, develop curriculum that encourages cross-disciplinary training from the undergraduate level, right? At the undergraduate level, and not only leave it to like, you kind of do it in your postdoc, right? Or after you've got tenure. Too late, right? We will not, you're already too entrenched when you're doing it and do not have the requisite skills to be able to do it. Change promotion and tenure policies. You're not going to get the big ERC grants if your promotion and tenure policies, have these antiquated clauses right over there that 7 solo authored papers, and you're not going to get social sciences to contribute to your projects in a meaningful way, because the social sciences are notorious for not participating in cross-disciplinary initiatives because of a lot of things, but because but a primary thing is it's not sufficiently incentivized in universities, right? So having panels and reviewers who actually know something about convergence research to actually evaluate these research proposals. You cannot have, they haven't made enough contributions to environmental engineering, why should this be funded? Or they haven't made contributions to psychology, and so this can't be funded. It's very difficult to be transformative in all different aspects, in multiple different, that's not how cross-disciplinarity should be assessed. And the same thing with promotion and tenure panels. Not really, really creating panels who know about the science of team science, who know something about the evaluation of these interdisciplinary products, and can assess the intellectual quality of these products, right? Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, Kerry.
Thanks for your talk. My question was about the timescale over which we evaluate success.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So for environmental engineering, something that you find that's a problem might not make its way into policy or results for 10 years, let's say.
Correct.
So I guess, how does the evaluation of success differ by field in this context?
Absolutely. You're not, that's another thing. You're not going to see results in 5 years, especially when you're opting for complex policy change. You want to create a regulatory framework for something, or you want to create a collaborative governance structure for addressing a certain pollutant. You're not going to get the result in 5 years. So there are intermediate markers that funding agencies and researchers can look for themselves. So for example, there's something called collaborative capacity, and we have measures of collaborative capacity. Where are institutions that have never talked to one another, have they begun talking to one another, right? Are there new committees that have been created that actually engage in policy making together? That's an intermediate marker. You may not have generated policy, but you created, as Phil Sharp and Mike Rocco kind of say, you integrated siloed kind of system. So that's an intermediate marker. And I think funding agencies should kind of look for those kinds of intermediate markers, and researchers who write the proposals, should think of these intermediate markers as well. Training of students. So for example, a civil engineering student kind of publishing in research policy. That's a pretty good marker of convergence research, to have the breadth, to be able to do that. It's not changing policy, but it's absolutely changing the kind of training and the facility with these kinds of and their disciplinary knowledge of another discipline.
I'd like to bring in something else. We think great conversion discipline is great, but you got to protect the core disciplinary program. I give you an example. Wastewater surveillance. The impact was not because of a big convergence. It was because individual investigators, we funded them to do career proposal. They decided that when metagenomics and others were coming out, they start applying to wastewater, sludge, and these individual investigators really took it to the next level. When we were ready to apply wastewater surveillance, that work has been done. So in promoting transdisciplinary research, we will have to make sure that we protect the core program, environmental engineers that come in. So this just, it's a tension that we face in funding agency. How do you actually do this while protecting the core program?
And the same tensions we see in researchers as well. Sometimes one of the kind of factors that inhibit people from really meaningfully engaging in cross-disciplinarity is almost as seeing cross-disciplinarity as a loss of identity, because you're trained in these really, unidisciplinary settings, and, this is your expertise, and doing transdisciplinary work is almost seen as a loss. So I think that narrative also needs to change. It's not a loss of identity, it's gaining something in addition to your core disciplinary work.
So I think we have time for maybe just one more question.
Absolutely.
So I guess my question, it sounds like this is risky business, kind of engage. And I'm kind of curious, like, what do you how do we incentivize some risk taking, right? Because like to walk across campus and have a conversation where you know nothing when you're used to being the expert, and then to trust in that conversation and process to develop and build over time when you have a few hours of discretionary time a week. How do you think we do a better job incentivizing those kinds of serendipity, I guess we could call it?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it cannot happen online, You cannot just say that, it's so easy to reach any expert around the world. Yeah, but if they answer your email, right? But, absolutely, co-location, being located in the same space, right? Absolutely, could promote, the serendipity, right? We have some research on the spatial correlates of cross-disciplinary work, but I think the broader question that you are asking is about the risk, right? If this is not incentivized at, so for example, promotion and tenure committees could look at someone's CV, and we have a really interesting paper by Julie Klein and Holly Falk-Brzezinski that actually talks about how cross-disciplinary researchers can write their CVs for a panel that doesn't understand cross-disciplinary research. It's almost like creating a shadow CV that, okay, this research actually, required X doing this, engaging with these community members, right? Visiting these kinds of places, right? Getting buy-in, to answer the survey for the right response rate for this, and this took this much time, right? And it generated, maybe it generated one paper in 1.5 years, but that paper was really impactful because it promoted, this kind of a change in this organization. So it almost has to be explained, in a lot of detail to kind of incentivize the change in the mindset of, kind of unidisciplinary researches or small team-based research is a lot easier. You can be a lot more productive, in the short time, right? But I think really, if universities looked at some of the larger scale changes that are happening in terms of where the impactful research really lies over time, I'm hopeful that these changes occur within the community. How do we incentivize it? Mentorship. I think a lot of great mentorship, at least in my experience, you cannot have the cognitive dissonance sometimes, where assistant professors and postdocs kind of hear one thing from a really cross-disciplinary full professor researcher saying, of course, this is really interesting research, go for it. And their department chair kind of saying that, oh, you're never going to get tenure if you're going to be engaged in these large scale teams, and, being the seventh author in a particular publication, right? So these, we need to be on the same page on these with, and it's very difficult to do that with different departmental cultures and entrenched. So it's not, I'm sorry, I don't have a kind of straightforward answer for you, but the thing is that systems are not really aligned for effective cross-disciplinary research.
Say something about, like, I think universities have a lot of work they could do to help. I'm in a small engineering school, so we actually know a lot of the faculty members across departments, and that's kind of a survival tactic in a way, because you may not have enough tenure tenure track research active faculty in your own departments. We meet others. We also have a bunch of centers that are cross-disciplinary that bring people together with forward-thinking leaders that have, like, for example, brought me into a center where I was like, I don't know any of the methods used here. Like, why do you want me? And they were like, we think you're right. And so then you meet the people doing really different things. And then seed funding is always really helpful. And some, our school has given seed funding for interdisciplinary teams. And I think that as an incentive has been really helpful too. But I agree, it's hard when it's comfortable in your own place, and it does take a lot of time.
Yeah, and I guess anyone reviewing anyone for this needs to take that into account, the type of research that someone is doing, and not apply generic criteria to any kind of research. Yeah, it's paramount.
So I just want to invite everyone to join me in thanking Shalini for this excellent presentation.